Hello, Smart Money Tree podcast listeners. Welcome to this week's show. My name is Kirk Chisholm, and I'll be your host. So today, I'm joined once again with Paul Rosenberg. How you doing, Paul?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming back on. Paul's a longtime friend. We've had him on the show in the past. He is formerly known as the crypto hippie, and he's got some great content. Love talking to Paul. He's just one of these people you always learn something from every time you talk to him. So I wanted to bring him back on the show. A lot of changes have happened since we've had him on in the past. So, Paul, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background for the listeners who haven't heard you speak before.
Sure. I have really my more formal background is in electrical construction and engineering, but I was in and among the early cypherpunks, which are the people from which came WikiLeaks, Bitcoin, practical encryption. I was in that crowd back in the 90s. I ran for many years a company called Crypto Hippie. We provided really good internet privacy. We made people anonymous on the internet. If you've seen the old spy movies where they go, "We're tracking him, Jim. He's in Aruba. No, he's in Madrid. No, he's in." That's what we did, and we did it for honest, nice people, not bad guys. Um, that had to close a couple of years ago, and I write a monthly newsletter at freemansperspective.com, just the way it sounds. We have a bunch of we have posts, not quite daily, but frequently. But the subscription newsletters, that's really where the action is.
Nice, nice. Well, I always appreciate your perspective. You've certainly seen a lot, and you've been a part of a lot of that change, which the technology revolution, which started when I was a kid, when I got my first Apple IIe, right after I had an Atari, and it was like it was just so different. I don't think people appreciate the way things used to be.
Oh, and the feel of getting on the internet in the early days. It was like, you had just broken out of prison and you're sticking your head above ground and looking around. It was a gas. If you weren't there for the early internet, I'm sorry, ask somebody who was. It was wonderful.
Remember the movie War Games? Like that was like the cutting edge back then.
Yeah, it changed. Gosh, it changed so fast. First we were struggling to put in fiber optic cables to make this thing work. I was involved with that too. Um, and then all of a sudden, here comes the internet, and everybody hated it. Oh my goodness. The New York Times ran a series on how awful it was, and it was going to the usual things. There's going to be, money launderers and, kiddie porn, and, it's going to be terrible. It was going to destroy world civilization. And funny that all went down the memory hole once it got big.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, all that stuff still happens. It just ends up in politicians' computers when they're no longer of use to
Right.
people.
Yeah, and people used to give me stuff. Oh, what about money laundering? I said, when people do dirty deals, they use dollars.
Yeah,
I mean, they do.
that it's funny because I was reading a stat somewhere. It said like a very high percentage of $100 bills are laced with cocaine. Like just
Yes.
there's like particles on it. It's like,
Yep.
yeah, the most money laundering happens with US dollars, but why don't people talk about that?
Well, new things are much better for scaring people.
Yeah.
So if you got something, Bitcoin is a great example. You got something new. Oh no, what this is thing? It could be used by, and it scares people. And let's face it, if you want to get masses of people to vote for you or to do whatever, convincing them rationally and reasonably is very hard. If you can just get them scared and point them in the direction, well, then that's easy.
Yeah, what was it? I think large banks do more for money laundering and helping the cartels than Bitcoin ever did.
Oh, there was a period of time, 10 years ago or something, maybe more, where between two of the big banks, they laundered several $100 billion for known violent drug cartels. These are big banks. And nobody went to jail. Nobody was prosecuted. So far as I know, nobody lost their job. What
Yep.
the hell?
Yep, that's what happened after 2008 too. No one was
Yeah,
fired, no one lost. I mean, the common people got fired, but nobody specifically went to jail. Just pay the fine and move on. It's
exactly right.
cost of doing business. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a little unfortunate, but fortunately, we do have this new technology, blockchain, crypto, whatever you want to call it, and it has led to some really interesting stuff. And I wanted you to come on and talk a little bit about that because there have been a lot of changes since you came on last. There are now multiple Bitcoin ETFs, and supposedly, cross our fingers, there'll be an Ethereum ETF coming out soon as well. Although, people seem a little suspect about security of it. So maybe you can talk about some of the changes that have happened in like the last year or so around the crypto markets.
sure. Let's start with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is pretty much the same. Um, People focus on the exchange rate, which is understandable. I mean, there are a lot of people who got into Bitcoin out of love and paid, $10 a coin, or in the case of people I know, picked up somebody's bar tab and got a few Bitcoins. And, all of a sudden they've got money and they're living in nice houses and everything else. So people pay attention to that, and understandably so. But Bitcoin is not the exchange rate. Bitcoin is not a stock. It's not a bond. It's not a traditional investment vehicle. It's a computer program that does math problems, but it does them in a genius way. So Bitcoin is the same. It's doing what it's doing. We just had a halving, which is where the amount of new Bitcoins that are created is cut in half. So it's essentially the inflation rate of Bitcoin, which is now extremely low, less than 2%. And every 4 years it gets cut again. So in 3.5 years from now, or whatever it is, almost 4 years, it'll be less than 1%. And 4 years after that, it'll be less than 0.5%. 19 point, I think it's almost 7 million Bitcoins exist, of 21 million that is the all-time high that will ever come. It's capped off, and it's right in the program, and the program can't be changed. It exists on thousands of computers worldwide, and if you wanted to change the program, you got to change all of those computers at the same time. So, Bitcoin just is. Now that they're doing ETFs with it, I presume that's just a function of people being interested. According to some people, and I haven't done a deep dive on the numbers, but according to some fairly reasonable guesses or surveys, some 40 million United States citizens own some Bitcoin. So, there's a demand for this thing. And so the Wall Street gods are trying to get it onto Wall Street so that they can get part of the action. So, in terms of, and from the investment aspect, it's a no-brainer. Bitcoin has to go up a lot more in terms of exchange rate, but the problem is nobody knows when. And what Bitcoin does is it does this, and it has these big. Now the upside is always way better than the downside, but it scares the hell out of people because all of a sudden, a couple of years ago, it went from a high of 60 something to a low of 17. But it's all a function of fear. That's all it is. When people get terrified by whatever. There was a period a couple of years ago when Donald Trump, who was then president, the Pope, the head of the ECB, twice, I believe, and just a long list of others, all trashed Bitcoin within a 2-week period. This is horrible. It's terrible. It's going to destroy whatever humanity and motherhood and everything else. So when you get those type of fear attacks, the price goes down, and you have to be ready to get kicked in the gut. I recommend, if people who hold Bitcoin, don't check the price. It's just not healthy for you. Check the price once a week, once a month, whatever, but don't check it every day all the time. It's just not good for you. Um, So there's a price for holding Bitcoin, but the upside is unbelievable, and I don't see any reason for it to change directions. The supply is almost down to nothing, while government currencies are, in a race to the bottom. So, I can't see any problem with that. When you move to Ethereum, the question is, what is Ethereum? Now, Ethereum is a special sort of thing. It runs what we call smart contracts, which is a really interesting thing and a really cool tool and a very hard thing to do. Ethereum has had problems. They have crashed several times. There was a real bad hack. There had to be a split. There's different kinds of Ethereum. Um, and I'm not particularly criticizing them for that, because the thing they're trying to do was very hard. And they've done it pretty well, and it works pretty darn well. So I'm happy with Ethereum for that. I don't consider it a good store of value because it's too open to change. They moved to a type of governance, if you will. It's called proof of stake instead of proof of work like Bitcoin. And proof of stake is a lot easier to manipulate. Um, so, and plus the supply has been altered and things like that. Bitcoin is a rock. Ethereum is kind of, more gravelly. It can be changed. It can be, moved around. It can be played with. Now that doesn't mean it's going to be played with. I'm not trying to attribute malintentions to anybody, but I wouldn't personally take it as a store of value. Um, so that has happened. Um, the various cryptos, um, I they're just way too many for me to keep track of. I look at the cryptos as tools. And if you can find one that's a good tool for a specific use, that's really cool. And I like that. I love Monero as a privacy currency. There are others, Pirate Chain and Zcash and others, that are good privacy coins. I like them for that. There are also other kinds of cryptos that are good for specific things. I wouldn't look at cryptos much as an investment vehicle. I see them more as tools to be used. So I think that's, in my estimation, a recap of where we are right now.
Okay, cool. So I've got tons of questions for you.
Hit me.
So out of curiosity, because Bitcoin, there's a lot of people hold stakes in cold storage. Like, what percentage of Bitcoin do you think is hoarded? It's not going to be used. It's just like, yeah, I'm going to put it in a bank vault and just leave it there forever. Like, what do you think fits that characterization,
I
percentage
don't know.
wise?
It's a pretty significant percentage. And even the people who will use their Bitcoin, let's take people who accumulated some, let's say somebody's got a few hundred Bitcoins, and they had them back in the old days, and they got them, and they can't believe their luck. Um, they sell, but they sell just enough.
Hmm.
They sell just a little bit. Bitcoiners, the old school Bitcoiners, are notoriously frugal. Um, you know, Bitcoiners will, live in a little tiny place, barely have any furniture, and have 150 Bitcoins on their cold storage wallet, and they're very happy that way. It's a different sort of culture. It's really a throwback to old culture, where and Bitcoiners have babies. Bitcoiners have kids. They have families. They care about these things, but they're very tight on their cash. They spend what they need to, and not a lot more. The old joke in the old days was, I'm going to get into Bitcoin and get a Lamborghini. But almost nobody actually bought a Lamborghini. They bought a Honda or a Toyota or something. and they got their Bitcoin on their cold storage wallet, and that's it. You know, so there's a whole lot. I don't know what percentage, but I would say probably more than 50% of people who will just, either are just holding it or saying, you know what, I'll hold it, but and I'll sell what I need to, but I'm not going to sell any more than I need. And if I get old and eventually die, then they'll go to my kids, and that's it. So I think there's a very large percentage of that, but I've never seen any numbers that I could really point to that I could say what it is. But it's significant.
Yeah, convenient way to circumvent the estate tax.
Totally, totally. And it really the one of the great advantages of Bitcoin that I think will sadly become more evident as time goes on is you can burst through currency controls. There are no currency controls for Bitcoin. You want to sell, you want to transfer Bitcoin to somebody, transfer Bitcoin to somebody. There's nobody in between. So, at some point, well, I mean, look at the last few years with, some of these outfits that never met a sanction that they didn't love. Um, Bitcoin, you don't worry about those things. You just send. So that may matter at some point. What else may matter at some point is Bitcoin is perfect collateral. It is the best form of collateral that I've ever seen or heard of. It's absolutely certain where it is. It's absolutely certain what it is, and you can do any way you like as an escrow or whatever. You need 2 out of 3 keys to send it. It's all very easy, been done thousands of times. And Bitcoin is, at this point, it's hard to argue that it's not super, super reliable. We just passed our 1 billionth transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain. That's a lot of transactions, and everything is fine. So anyway, um,
So here's where I was going with my question though, is one thought I had, because I've interviewed a few people in the crypto world, and one thought that came up as I was thinking about what are some of the challenges that face Bitcoin, right? Because it's mostly been mined. Yes, there's a whatever 1.5 million, 1.3 Bitcoin left to be mined, but it's pocket change compared to the 19.7 that's already out there. So numbers wise, it's a small percentage. So mining more isn't going to really move the needle all that much.
right.
Demand for it will. And so my question is, with the new Bitcoin and the was it 12 companies out, the ETFs out there that they're holding Bitcoin? Well, eventually it'll probably be 3 or 4 because it's just the way these ETFs work, right? They all try to grab market share and then, someone ends up gobbling up. It's usually iShares or Vanguard or one of these big companies that gobbles up the market share. Now, here's my question. Most people, and this is why I asked how many people have it in cold storage, because it takes the majority of people to change Bitcoin. But if you have all the Bitcoin housed in ETFs by BlackRock, which of course a lot of people don't like in the crypto community, if they're housing it all, and you get like a few more of these firms, and now you've got the majority, and now they can dictate, the rules of Bitcoin, or countries. Like I would imagine that would be possible in 10 years from now, or wherever things, if they go that way. So
It,
what are your
it's
thoughts on something like that?
it's extremely unlikely. The real movers who could actually do nefarious stuff are the miners, because they run the nodes. Who holds the Bitcoin is not as important as who has the nodes on the network, who has the computers on the network. Um, the serious attempt for that was in 2015, 16, 17, where a very serious challenge was placed by the crew that was involved with Bitcoin Cash. And they forked off the Bitcoin, broke off Bitcoin, and tried to say ours is better. We're doing this, and they had a lot of support. Didn't work. And if it didn't work then, I just don't see it working now. Bitcoin miners um, tend to be, I'll put it this way, they behave pretty darn well, and there's a lot of them. So you'd have to change so much at in such a incredibly short period of time to do things. I just don't see it. What I think is going on with the ETFs, with the strategic guys at Morgan Stanley or wherever else they are, um, and the central banks and such, because again, central banks have a problem with Bitcoin because it evades their controls. It doesn't purposefully evade their controls. It's just a different thing, and it doesn't operate the same as everything else. Um, but I think what their concern would be is they want to get everything in the world, especially the Europeans lately, to be in KYC. Know your customer, anti-money laundering sort of stuff. And I think they're trying to pull, or at least they're happy to pull Bitcoin into wallets over which they have some control. So if Vanguard, let's say, has a Bitcoin fund where they're holding actual Bitcoin, well, then all of that Bitcoin, they know exactly who it belongs to, and that sort of thing. Honestly, I'm expecting at some point down the road, God only knows when. If I knew when, I would be very, very rich. Um, uh, that there's going to be more trouble with inflation and sovereign defaults and things like that, and people, I think, are going to at some point try to get their money out of ETFs and into real Bitcoin or personally held Bitcoin because they're afraid of currency controls. Now, when did that happen? I don't know. Right now, that doesn't seem to be on many people's radar, but at some point it may. And again, also with collateral. Right now, nobody cares about such things, but at some point they may. And at that point, again, Bitcoin becomes a very, very important thing to a lot of people. So it's getting around. You'd be surprised where it shows up. Somebody sent me a clip of Tucker Carlson saying that, I'll leave the name out, some very, very, very famous, very big Western political leader uh, told him that, yeah, I'll give you an interview, but you're going to have to give me $1 million. And he said, you can pay it, you can pay it in US dollars, gold, or Bitcoin. And I was like, oh, nobody seemed to notice that he said this, so, I don't know exactly what that was, but I thought that was interesting. It's getting around. So we'll see.
Yeah, it does bring up the question of where directionally where that's going to go,
Yeah.
because you've got the central banks losing power, you've got the government, the U.S. government losing power, and it's of their own device. I mean, they're the ones causing this. You've got the corporate media losing its power. You've got certainly other countries gaining power, and hopefully the individuals in this country will get more, although that's always suspect when people lose power, they tend to grab more, and it usually comes from at the expense of others. So where do you think things go? Because the US is not going in a good direction. We got 35 trillion, not including liabilities, the unfunded liabilities. It's a disaster. It's as somebody I know phrases, it's a bug in search of a windshield. So what
I like that.
what is the direction that's where are we going with the US? Like where does it end up? Like as an investor, obviously I want to protect against inflation, I want to protect against other things, but like when the stuff hits the fan, like what do I do? So like where are we going? The best of your guess.
Well, and it's kind of, I'm an American kid, and it's kind of painful to go through all this, but the U.S. and the Europeans too, the political and foreign policy layer has just shot themselves in the gut, not in the foot, not in the leg, in the gut, um, by trashing international monetary flows. You cannot just steal 200 or whatever it is, 200 some $billion of Russia's foreign exchange. You can't do that. Commerce has to go on. The story is during the Revolutionary War, George Washington had a pretty good piece of money in the Bank of England, and it was untouched throughout the war. And after the war, they left it alone because commerce has to go on. People need to eat. So when you start breaking down international monetary flows and throw people off SWIFT and sanction everything under the sun and never stop, they have forced the global East, the global South, to build their own monetary systems. I mean, it's insane. It brings to mind the old line, whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad. The U.S., the foundation of its power is the dollar. It's not even the military; it's the dollar, and it was all of world trade for a long time, and it allowed the U.S. to print, 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 and spread it all out across the world and keep inflation at home pretty moderate. That doesn't seem like it's going to continue, but they have just forced everybody, or forced the East and the South to do their own thing. Right now, China and Russia conduct a world of trade in energy, oil, gas, and whatever, plus other commodities. And now 90% of it is all done in their local currencies. It used to be the dollar. And, how can you do this? I mean, these guys aren't stupid. They have smart guys. To build their own monetary systems isn't that hard. They've got them and they were expanding them, and this is not looking good long term. Where to go? Well, the usual places are assets you can actually own: Bitcoin, gold, silver, stocks that you actually own. That you own actual controlling stocks that matter in companies that really produce things, that are not just, who should I pick on? Netflix, that it's an ephemeral sort of thing. Anybody, they have deals, but are based on monopolies and based on advantage and based upon, politicians making it all work. But it's not physical stuff. They're not digging anything out of the ground. They're not building anything. They're not refining anything. They're not smelting anything. You want companies that you can be happy with their stock, even if the stock exchanges weren't there. Not to bet on the price, but to get actual dividends from an electric company, something that's real. This is the way the world seems to be moving. But honestly, I don't think most people are ready to do that because it seems like everything's okay. There's this we call a period of latency, when one thing happens and then everything stays the same until everything happens at some other point. And those periods can be very long and very surprising for how long they go. But like you say, $35 trillion of debt, something like $200 trillion of promises to people my age for Medicare and all that stuff. This is not trivial. This is real. This is real money. And if at the same time the rest of the world starts saying, you know what, we really don't need the dollar anymore, that's a problem. Now, it may not be a problem today. It may not be a problem next year. And I don't know when that date is. But at some point, it becomes a problem. You have that. And one of the other things that I see is, for a lot of corporations, international corporations, they're vulnerable because the third world isn't the third world anymore. Manila is no longer a city with half dirt roads. Manila has super highways and really good hospitals and really nice cars on their highways. And the same thing can go for Indonesia and 100 others. The third world isn't the third world anymore. And US and European corporations made generational wealth out of building out the third world, building the roads, consulting engineering firms, telling them how to make things and build things, and all of the things that went on. But it's not the third world anymore, and they don't need us anymore. Um, that the changeover is going to be slow and sloppy, but at some point, the local guys are going to say, "Why are we shipping all of the money to New York and London? Our guys are doing the work. Let's tell Colbert, Kravitz, Roberts to get out. We don't want you anymore." In 2022, uh, I don't remember. It's a long list of companies pulled out of Russia. McDonald's and I think Coke and various electronic manufacturers. It was a long list of major companies that pulled out of Russia. Guess what? The Russians are doing just fine. They opened replacements. They got a replacement at McDonald's. They have all sorts of things. They got smart guys too. They can work too. And so they're doing just fine. Well, what happens when Indonesia sees this? So, I just, where it ends up is the US becomes what Europe is now. And that is, used to be an unbelievable place that moved the world forward. No, it's, great. They got great buildings and museums and good food and nice people. And, we go visit. But it's not going to be what the US has been. And they're absolutely doing it. The political bosses, the foreign policy gurus are absolutely doing it to themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a sad state of affairs, for sure. I mean, just seeing the direction that we're going. I don't know if you saw this, but I just saw a note that this past week that our agreement with Saudi Arabia for oil ended. Our 50-year agreement that brought stability to a very unstable time ended.
Yeah, I just saw a headline on that. I didn't have a chance to dig into it, but yeah, that they can do what they want now too. And they're not particularly really happy with the US of late. So
The world is unmoored by what used to be were the world's policemen. Not saying it was a good thing, but we were effectively the world's policemen. Now the world's become unmoored because there's no ties like there used to be. I mean, there's some obviously, but
right,
um,
but not
yeah,
like before.
yeah. I mean, inflation's picking up. I mean, it's going to be. Yeah, I think your comparison to Europe is probably a very accurate one. Um, just based on kind of what we're seeing, right? We're not.
Yeah.
What was the old quote? Was it Hawthorne who said this? Is like you become broke two ways gradually and then all at once.
Yes. Yes.
So, um,
That's the way, there the other old quote is, sometimes there are decades where nothing happens, and sometimes there are weeks when decades happen.
yeah, that sounds right.
You know,
Oh boy.
so so it's one of those things, and I worry about uh, Americans, because I like Americans. I am one. I like them, and I respect most of them, and they're mostly good people. Uh, but the um, the way things are going, I worry about them because there's just so much mayhem going on and so many changes, and they want everyone to believe that everything is perfectly normal and everything is great and everything is fine. Don't worry. This important person says so. And this TV actor is making fun of the politician that you think is good. And such division and hatred, and you know the COVID time got me, and the people hating each other publicly, and wishing people to die, and all of a sudden free speech is bad. I mean, people
Yeah.
were writing books on free speech is a bad idea, and the
Yep.
books were being promoted,
Hmm.
and I'm going, you know, "Ah!" When did this happen?
Yeah, and people with opinions were shouted out of the room as basically you're killing, you're un-American, it's unpatriotic. Like, okay,
I know.
sure, that's what that word means.
Right. Right. That's the Indigo Montoya. You keep using that word.
I
I
don't
don't
think you
think
know
it
what it
means what you
means.
think it means.
I gotta watch that movie again. But
It's a classic.
but yeah, it makes me want to. I mean, Ayn Rand's book, Atlas Shrugged, makes me want to go shirk away from society and let everybody devolve into whatever they devolve into and come back later. Like it's,
Right.
it directionally that's where we're going. It's
It's,
scary to think about.
it is. And, I'm not fundamentally worried about America because a large percentage of the American people are productive human beings. And, you know, that matters. And so all of the political stuff can all drop to the ground and rot. But most American people are productive human beings. So when the effluent hits the fan, so to speak, which it may hit the fan very slowly and in little clumps, but nonetheless, these are people who want to be productive, who want to have a decent life, who want to raise a decent family. They're still seduced by politics. They're still seduced by promises and are very often unwilling to suffer the indignity of changing their mind. Um, and to accept that they made a mistake. And there's, I could go on at length about the abuses of, social media and such. But at the end of the day, there's a whole lot of people in the North American continent who just want to be good people and raise a family and be left alone and be a good neighbor.
I agree with that.
So long term, I'm not particularly worried, but gosh, I hope too many of them don't get hurt in the interim.
Yeah, I think I think it's important. We all have this apocalypse porn, like the world's going to end tomorrow and oh my God. I mean, you see this movie Civil War. Oh yeah, that's going to happen. How many people do you know are going to pick up arms and fight against their neighbor? Zero. Maybe there's a kook
Zero.
down the street, but other than that, zero people are going to do that. It's not going to happen. And I think that people always search for this end of the world kind of scenario, or they just ignore the bad stuff and they're like, oh, everything's fine, and just keep it over here. But the reality is that our country is made up of good people, and when push comes to shove, we're a country of fighters, and we'll fight for what is right, even though we might go down a lot of bad roads to get there, as we did during COVID. I think a lot of bad things happen that shouldn't have, and rights got trampled that shouldn't have. But ultimately, I think people look back and be like, "Oh, that was wrong." Like, oh,
Hmm.
you look back at some of the terrible things that are done in other countries, and they're just like, "Oh, wow, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have shot those people." Like, like in
Right.
Nazi Germany when they interview like the Nazis are like, I, sorry, I was forced into it. Like, the Milgram experiment, all those other things that show that that's human nature, right? Not saying it's right, but it's human nature. Um, Anyway, so as we wrap it up here, what are some takeaways you can give people for investment advice? How should people be thinking about their investments going forward, given all the stuff we talked about?
I would say look forward. Don't focus on the next quarter. If you're good enough at that and you want to take bets on Procter and Gamble's next quarterly report, well, okay. But I don't think most of us can do that. I say look at long term, and my things that I know that I would be comfortable putting my money in. Your mileage may vary. Are Bitcoin. I'm happy with gold and silver. I don't expect them to appreciate a tremendous amount, but I'm happy with them. I like Bitcoin for appreciation, but also for the fact that it's true free market money. And no matter which regime comes and goes in which capital, Bitcoin doesn't change. It just is. It's just the same. And I can send it internationally, which is very hard with gold. As much as I like gold, it's hard to send it internationally. You can't send your buddy $100. At least you can, but it's not easy. Um, so I like Bitcoin. I like precious metals. I like commodities. Um, but the question is, how do you own them? How easy it is to transfer them and things like that. And it's a whole world of its own. But I like companies that actually produce physical things. Um, because that just is it. You don't have to argue about it. If you've got 150 dump trucks, that's 150 dump trucks. Those are real items. If you've got tanks full of natural gas or whatever, those are real things, and they don't have a great deal of counterparty risk. A truck is a truck, a house is a house. um, there are complications with all of those, but I like that sort of thing. I like companies that actually pay dividends. I would do something like that. I like local businesses that you can have some hand in fixing it if things start going sideways. I like those sorts of things. Very, very old school, because I think the next 10 to whatever years are going to be tumultuous. And I think it's better to come out on the other side and be able then to see what makes sense. Long term, I think we're golden. Just the next decade or two rather scare me.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your insight today, Paul. Where can people find more about you?
Freemansperspective.com, just the way it sounds.
Cool. Well, we'll put that in the show notes, but really appreciate you coming on the show, Paul. Always enjoy our conversations. I think Paul will be joining me at a conference in I think November, um, President's Week, which we always speak at. It's a great conference with great people
Yeah.
who think similarly. So once again, thanks for coming on the show, Paul.
Oh, my pleasure.
Hey, Doug, did you hear? We're giving away free money. Well, I'll tell you about it in a minute, but before I do, there's a saying in the mining community, well, precious metals mining, that is. The saying is that if you want the best deals, you have to be in the room. Now, you're probably thinking, what does it mean to be in the room? Well, I'll tell you. Being in the room means that you're on the short list of people who get invited to be a part of the best deals. These are the deals that most investors will never have access to. You mean like IPOs? Nope, IPOs are chump change. Those are for retail investors, small potatoes. That's nothing compared to these deals. These deals would have you salivating to get access to them. Once you know they exist, you will never look at investing the same way again. I almost don't want to even tell you that they exist because it will ruin your thinking of how the investing world really works. Now, you might be excited that these deals exist, but you only have access to the deals if you're an insider, or in the room as they call it. Now, as loyal listeners to the show, I'm going to give you a chance to be in the room. Money Tree Investing Podcast has created the Insiders Club. This is a community of our show's members who are loyal listeners of the show and want to get more out of their investing experience. Being a part of the Insiders Club gives you insider status for upcoming events and webinars, discounts, free stuff and books, and influence on the future direction of the show. This is a great opportunity to join us as we expand our content and services. Oh, and did I mention free money? Yes, in the next few weeks, I'll be giving away free money to our members of the Insiders Club as my appreciation for listening to the show. Now, there's no cost to join the Insiders Club. Just go to moneytreepodcast.com/free money today to join the community. That's www.moneytreepodcast.com/free money. I hope to see you in the room.
All right. Well, that was a great interview with Paul. Always appreciate him coming on the show. Paul is our resident expert when it comes to crypto. So if anyone knows what's going on in that world, it's Paul. And so I always love him coming on and sharing his wisdom with us. Now we're into the panel portion of the show. We have our very own Barb Friedberg. Hey, Barb.
Hi, happy to be here.
Great to have you. And we also have our very own Phil Weiss. Hey, Phil.
Hey, Kirk. Happy to be here as well.
Great. Great to have you as well. So let's just dive right in. So I think Barb's going to take over the mic and grill us today. So going to get on the hot seat exchange with her. So Barb, you wanna lead it here?
I do. First of all, I want to give a shout out to Paul Rosenberg, our guest. Super smart guy. Way, way, way smarter than me. And he brought up some issues that are, dare I say, controversial. So let's dig into the crypto question. Some of us love it, some of us hate it, some of us don't even understand it. So my first question goes to you, Kirk. What is the real value of crypto other than hoping for great appreciation because the supply is limited because in our everyday lives? How is it how can it really be used on a day-to-day basis, and what's it for?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So, crypto, or more accurately, blockchain, is a brand new technology that it came out basically when Bitcoin came out. And as a concept, it's beautiful, right? We've been trying as, I don't mean me, but like as a society, we've been trying to protect information for long periods of time. And, I always look at it as like the cops and the speeders, right? The cops come out with a radar gun. We have a radar detector. And then the cops have a radar detector. And then we have ways to block out the radar detector. And it's just a back and forth fight. It's always the same, right? Any technology, if they're trying to protect something, someone's going to try to break the rules, and then they're going to try to get them, and it's back and forth and back and forth. And there really is no solution, because as long as you have enough time and money, you can break into any system. And so there really is no solution. This is actually one of the best solutions you can come up with by doing the exact opposite of what you would think. So the idea of protecting information is that that nobody knows what it is, and that they can't steal it. Or more accurately, they can't steal it. It's not just they don't know what it is, it's they can't steal it. So this is the exact opposite approach. Instead of trying to hide this stuff so nobody steals it, you're giving it out to everybody and saying, I have this stuff. I'm just using stuff as an example, widgets. I have this widget. Everyone knows I have the widget. It's my widget, because everywhere around the world has a ledger that says, hey, Kirk owns the widget. So 1 billion people on the planet can see I own the widget. Now, if Barb comes and said, no, it's my widget, everyone can see Barb does not own the widget. I own the widget. So she can't steal it from me because it's mine. Everyone knows it's mine. They can prove it's mine. It's on the blockchain. It's on the technology. In order for somebody to, if Barb wanted to hack it and steal my widget, she would have to go to 1 billion people and hack them individually, as opposed to just going to my house and stealing it, right? So the security around blockchain is it flies in the face of what you think would be normal, and yet because you're distributing it widely, that gives you protection via the ownership. So the way blockchain works is it allows you to protect yourself through broadly distributed information. Now, Bitcoin is basically the first iteration of blockchain. And so what happened when it came out, it was a brilliant way for people to, or Satoshi, whoever came up with it, or people came up with it. It was a brilliant way to solve a very interesting challenge, and at the same time, create something that solved a very different problem. So blockchain itself is brilliant. Like the concept is, whoever came up with it, kudos. It is a brilliant technology. However, Bitcoin came out to solve a very specific problem, which was, I don't trust Wall Street. Wall Street took advantage of people, the housing market and all that. This came out in 2008. We need something that we can opt out of the system. We don't trust Wall Street. We don't trust the Fed. Obviously, the Fed after 2008 is either negligent, stupid, or they're involved, right? Or they're complicit. Like there is no other option, because it was so poorly managed in 2008 that people were just like, I'm done. Like, and so there's a big pull for Bitcoin because people were just like, I want to opt out of the system. And this is a brilliant way to opt out of the system. It doesn't allow the government to just print money. It doesn't allow for inflation. If anything is deflationary, it solved a lot of the problems. Now, there are many more problems like that come from this, which we can talk about. But the brilliance of it was that it solves a handful of problems, and it does it in an elegant way that you can't hack. You can't hack Bitcoin, or it hasn't been hacked, and people have tried. A lot of people have tried because there's a lot of money at stake. So the brilliance of it is the usage comes from the practical nature, and also for the potential outcome from using this. Because if most people are speculating now, but at some point when it stabilizes, people will be able to use this as a currency, and it'll be stable, and people will trust it, as opposed to a government, which nobody who has the right mind trusts the government. Even if you believe your party, you still don't trust them. You may believe them, but you don't trust them. If you're smart, anyway. So this is a way for people to opt out. There was a time where people were very separate and all over the place, and then governments consolidated people. Like you think of Germany prior to the unification, there was all these warring tribes, and then they unified Germany, and the same way. And so we unify people, it helps in a collectivist way, but then you get a little too collectivist, and that becomes a problem. And then so the trend of blockchain is more decentralization. So it's giving people their independence. And so it allows people to make their own decisions, but at the same time, having that connectiveness in a different way. So I'll stop, give the mic over to Phil, but we can go back more about it. But that's kind of how I think about it, and that's why I think it's a really brilliant concept.
I think that was really helpful, Kirk. And the one thing that you said that resonates is once it stops becoming so volatile, I can see a lot more uses of that. Sure, but we're not there now. So Phil, thoughts, Bitcoin, first of all, do you use it for your clients? Do you use it yourself? Do you think it's viable, not viable? What's your take?
First, I don't use it personally. I have a couple clients that do. The one client in particular I can think of, and it's been very successful with it. He does it on his own. It's somebody that I don't manage the portfolio, and he wants Bitcoin. It's fine. We talk about it all the time. He actually sent me a video to help explain the position. I haven't gone through it yet, but he sent me a video because he has a very specific theory and process that he uses. There's another firm that I manage assets for. They like to put Bitcoin in portfolios. So when I'm managing portfolios for their clients, I will occasionally purchase it through an ETF, but generally I don't use it. And the biggest reason, and I like what Kirk said, because the question I asked before we started is, if it's hard for me to envision something being a currency when it fluctuates in value and is as volatile as Bitcoin is. I know that all currencies trade on public markets, and the value of every currency, if we use the dollar as a standard relative to the dollar, changes all the time, but not at the same level that Bitcoin does. And as long as it does fluctuate as much as it does, it's hard for me to see it being used as a currency. What does it, I guess, so the question that comes to me is, so we say when it stabilizes, it can be, and that makes sense, right? Because of some of the reasons that Kirk said, but what is it going to take for it to get there? And I don't know the answer to that. I'm curious.
I know, Phil. So basically, if you think about any sort of new technology, it goes through this growth curve, right? There's the early adopters, the people who were trading, a pizza for Bitcoin back in 2010 or whatever. Those stories of people who were basically just doing it for fun. And that was an expensive pizza, right? You're trading like 5 Bitcoins for pizza back when Bitcoin was like whatever it was, like 25 cents. That's an expensive pizza, right? Because it's like Warren Buffett always says, like, if you had invested in Warren Buffett initially, it costs a certain amount. But if you had ever sold a share, that was a really expensive share to sell. No matter what it was priced, it has gone up exponentially in price since he started. Bitcoin's the same thing, right? If you had bought a pizza for 5 Bitcoin, that's an expensive pizza, right? Because of what Bitcoin's priced at now. But if you think about the practical nature of it, when you go through an early adoption curve, very few people get into it. It bounced around a lot. It's just a hobbyist kind of a technology. Then it starts to be adopted once more people understand it, and then more and more people, and then once it gets widely adopted, it kind of flatlines. So there's kind of this curve that Bitcoin has gone up. So it's kind of gone up this curve, this sharp. And for those of you listeners, I'm actually making motions with my finger. I know you know what I'm doing, so I'm just explaining it. But it keeps going higher and higher, and then it gets to a point where it starts to flatten out. So if you just kind of Google Bitcoin growth curve or something like that, you're going to see this. A lot of people have math behind it because it is basically a math problem. This is basically what Bitcoin or blockchain is. It's math. So there is going to come a point where there won't be any more Bitcoin mined. There will be a certain amount of adoption being used because it is being used, and it will continue to be used the more that people build out platforms around it. Your point is valid, though. Why use it for a currency if it's bouncing around all the time? True. Fewer people are using it for currency right now, in large part because of the speculation. Why am I going to, use Bitcoin when I can save it and make more money tomorrow? So there's this element of people not wanting to use it because it's speculative. People are buying it for speculation. So it's a self-reinforcing loop where the speculation causes more speculation. But there does come a point where you have enough people who own it. There is a point where there's not many more or an insignificant amount more being mined, at which point it becomes stable. Because there will only ever be, I think it's 19.5 million Bitcoins out there. They'll never make another one. So once that's out, that's it. You're not going to have 20 million. And so once you know how many are there, and there's a certain amount of people in the world, well, now your Bitcoin actually appreciates over time, but at a much slower rate. So let's say the global population increases by 2% a year. I don't know what that number is. I'm guessing. Let's say it's 2% a year. So then your Bitcoin goes up 2% a year. If let's say Bitcoin's the global reserve currency, I'm using this as an example. So let's say everyone's using it and no other currencies, which I know is not likely, but let's say that's the case. You have whatever it is, 6 billion, how many we have? 8 billion people now, something like that. Let's say you have 10 billion, just for the sake of numbers, and they go up 2% a year, right? So now you're getting 200 million people every year that are increasing the number of people. So that 2%, whatever that Bitcoin is, let's say it's at $1 million. Now it goes up to $1 million, 20,000, right? And it keeps going up, not because the price is going up, but because more people are adopting it, which means there's 2% more people. And so the price goes up and to compensate. So effectively, that will grow at the rate of the population, which is actually what you want, right? You don't want it to grow at the rate of government printing. You want it to grow, you want it to be stable and grow at the rate of population expansion, because those are the people, because if you don't, the population keeps expanding, then that's a different story. So that in itself is a self-regulating system. Now it's speculative now. I mean, I wouldn't sell my Bitcoin now. I'm speculating like everybody else. I own some. I'm going to hold it to a certain price, and then maybe when we get close, we'll decide. But for the moment, I'm speculating. I use the word speculating in air quotes, but speculating or investing, depending on the term you want to use, in the fact that I think it's going to go much higher because the math works, because the technology works, and because, frankly, the other alternatives stink. So, it's hard to imagine that this will get derailed because people want it. The technology works. It's not breaking. People have tried. And it's really just a matter of, are you going to own Bitcoin? Or are you going to own your own currency? Well, yeah, you have to own your currency. But at some point, we become El Salvador and we decide, hey, this is the only thing that's working. Let's convert over to El Salvador currency, which is Bitcoin. So I'm not, and I want to reiterate this, this is not go out and buy Bitcoin. Like, I'm not suggesting that. This is not advice. But as a understanding of the concept of how it works, I think the world is going in the direction of cryptocurrencies. Which one it ends up being, I don't know. But the temporary high fluctuation of Bitcoin is an important element, but it's in large part because it doesn't have a wide enough adoption. The more adoption it has, the less speculative and less volatile it'll be. So I think a lot of people are seeing the growth curve. They're seeing they want to get on board, and they're willing to take a bet that it's going to go much higher. And the more people that jump on board, the more stable it will be. And eventually it stabilizes and becomes something that can be used. But right now, I agree. It's not a usable currency because it's volatile, but it will get there in large part because of this adoption that I've been talking about.
That was really helpful. And it gives all of us something to think about, whether you're a proponent or not. You can't ignore Bitcoin because it is slowly being adopted by the big financial institutions, by many, many, many individuals. And predicting the future, nobody can do that with certainty. There is one thing that is absolutely certain. Things are going to be different tomorrow than they are today. So, Phil, on that note, Paul discussed a lot of things that he sees happening in the future. And I'd like you to respond to that and give us your thoughts on future predictions and how our listeners should respond when they hear future predictions by smart people, by people on television, by people at investment houses and other talking heads.
Well, I'm going to start by telling a story because I think it sums up how I think about predictions. So at one point in time, I was a stock analyst and I covered the energy sector, oil and gas companies like the Exxons of the world and some of the all across the sector. And one of my jobs was to make an oil price forecast. And when I would get called, I would basically preface my answer with this. Part of my job, I am paid to forecast the price of oil. So I'm going to give you a forecast. But now there's about one number that I can almost assure you it's not going to be. And that's the number that I just gave you, because I can't predict what's going to happen to the world economy. I can't predict what's going to happen to supply and demand of oil. I can't predict how different governments, because remember that so much of oil is nationalized, are going to react, because oil doesn't even always respond to normal supply and demand, because some economies are oil-based economies. And so they do make decisions based upon their economic needs, not what the world needs and not what the global supply and demand is. So I don't believe, like you said, tomorrow's going to be different than today. 5 years from now, it's going to be different from today too, but I don't know what's going to happen to get us there. I know that there's lots of people, and I'll occasionally get emails from a client like, so-and-so said that the world's falling apart and this is going to happen in the market. So my first reaction when I do that is I look that person up, do a Google search, and I can send you pages of searches that show all the different times that they predicted this doom and gloom forecast. And I say, look, they predicted this before. Could they be right? Yeah. But they've done it a lot of times, and a broken clock is right twice a day too. So I don't want to put all my eggs in the basket of listening to somebody's prognostication. I mean, and some people get stuff right and they live off that one prediction. So to me, you want to make good long-term decisions about what's best for you. I'm not going to make big forecasts. I kind of think of it that the best predictor of the future is the past, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be the same, right? There's always this time is different, but we have a lot of times where we say this time is different and it's not. So I believe in the importance of having a process that I follow and that I stick to govern the decisions that I make. Like, here's our asset allocation. We're going to rebalance based upon a set of rules. We have a process that helps pick what goes into that portfolio, that helps us decide when to do it. Because at least if I follow the same process continually, it gives me the ability to figure out if something doesn't work. I have a much better chance of figuring out why, if I follow the same process over and over again, than if I keep changing my process. It's like if you think back when you were in school and you did science experiments, you always wanted to have a control, right? Having a process is kind of like having that control, and you have the variables and you change those different variables and see what the impact is. But you can't change 5 variables at a time and see what happens, because then you don't know which one really caused the change that you saw. So I'm not big on making forecasts. I think it's much more relevant to have a process. And I told you what I had to do, what I would tell people when I was told I had to make a forecast.
That is very sensible advice. And for my 2 cents, I love to look at valuation figures. And the stock market in general is frequently valued by the price earnings ratio, which is the price, either the current price based on either last year's earnings or forecasted future earnings. And that metric can be used for individual stocks as well as for an overall market price earnings ratio. And the way that number is used is compared with the past, compared with the average of the past. And if you do that exercise, you'll say today, wow, the average of the S&P 500 PE is, say, 17%, 18%. And let's say, and I'm just approximating because I don't know what it is today, let's say today it's 24. So that's telling you the stock market is overvalued. So with that information, what do? Do you sell because, wow, the stock market's overvalued, so it's bound to come back to mean valuation? The stock market can stay overvalued for many, 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 many years. And if you sell today, you may miss out on a ton of upside. And that is why, back to Phil, you have to follow a process. And I might add, you need to be diversified because, for example, this week, small cap value has exploded. Now, I have held that asset class waiting for years, and many, many years it just kind of lagged along. So now that fortunately I'm in that asset class, our portfolios are benefiting. So Kirk, I'm going to redirect us a little bit. At the end of the interview, you asked Paul Rosenberg, what advice do you have for investors? And I'm paraphrasing, but Paul said pretty much, well, I like crypto, I like gold, I like silver, I like commodities and dividend-paying stocks. What is your take on what Paul said, and kind of what type of assets you think investors should have in their portfolios?
I mean, I think it's a great perspective that Paul has, and I can't obviously give individual advice on the show. So, but I do want to suggest that I think Paul's thinking in the right direction. There are many big trends going on, and I'm a big fan of gold and silver and precious metals, basically, and I'm a big fan of crypto, and in large part commodities, because the amount of money printing going on is tremendous and has caused a huge spike in inflation a few years ago, and it's mostly under control at the moment. Who knows what's going to happen in the future, but at the moment it's contained. But it raises some challenges because the government's not going to stop printing money. Now, we have an election coming up in depending on when this episode goes live, but in November. Trump, inevitably it's Trump, because actually the convention just happened, so it's definitely Trump. And then, of course, we think it's going to be Biden, but then we don't know if it's Biden and a lot of stuff. So we have no idea who's going to be running on the Democratic side at this point. It seems to be kind of, I don't want to swear, but it's it's a mess. So basically, but here's the takeaway from that. Like, where people always think, well, what's going to happen if this person gets elected? Both people have already been president. We know what we're going to get. We know Trump is going to try to lower taxes. He's going to keep printing money. Biden is going to talk about raising taxes. Maybe does, maybe doesn't. Who knows? And he's also going to keep printing money. So inevitably, whatever happens, we're going to continue to have inflationary policies. There's no doubt behind that. Now, if Biden steps down, somebody else goes in, who knows? But reality is, this Democratic platform is higher taxes and let's print money. Nobody is talking about not printing money. So that trend is not going to stop, right? Now, if Kennedy gets in, which is certainly a possibility at this standpoint because it's such a mess in the electoral system based on the candidates, Kennedy's a possibility. I think it's probably low possibility, but it's definitely a possibility. You can't rule it out. I'm not sure what his tax platform is, so I don't know. I'm not sure what his money printing platform is, so I can't speak to that. But I can say that in general, anyone who comes out and says, we're going to stop printing money like drunken sailors, that might be a good platform, but you can't practically do it. So if you stopped printing money, if you started balancing the budget, that effectively is going to lead to a recession. Not because it does lead to a recession, but because we are artificially stimulating our economy and have been for decades. So if you stop printing money, it effectively leads to a recession. That's not how this should work, but that's how the government has jerry-rigged our system so that it actually works that way. So practically, think about it. A president comes in and says, I want to fix the system. I'm going to stop printing money. Great, you do that. The economy goes down, the stock market crashes, and now you look like you're the culprit, even though that's effectively how you fix the system. Like, look at Japan. Japan went through a 30-plus year bear market in their stock market because they had a deflationary, I mean, they didn't try to do this, but they got caught in deflation. And for 30 years, they got stuck in a deflationary spiral. The stock market went down for like 30-plus years. Who is going to go run on that platform? No one. Unless you're president for life and you can do this and get away with it. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. So while it might be a nice fuzzy thinking to want it to happen, it's never going to happen because no one is going to stand up to be what would be considered in hindsight probably the worst president in the world because you're doing it for 4 years. You probably need about 15 years to correct the system. So no one's going to stand up to do this even if you know how the system works. It's not practical. So it effectively leads to a crash and a reset and a bunch of other things that people have been talking about because there is no other way. The math just doesn't, you can't make up numbers. This is the math. And I've looked at the math. I've talked to people who are smarter than me. They've looked at the math. No one is sitting there saying, oh, there's a way out of this. There isn't. The only way out is a reset, deflation, or keep inflating, which effectively leads to hyperinflation. So there is no bright, sunny future outcome that is a nice outcome. They're all ugly. It's just one's uglier than the next. So getting back to the question, what it really comes down to is what are the best assets? Hard assets, crypto, gold, silver, or crypto's not a hard asset, but I put it in that category. Hard asset. Commodities, hard assets. Dividend stocks are good, but a lot of them are too expensive right now. I would buy them after a crash. I would load up on high dividend stocks. That'd be great. But we're in this cycle where everybody just buys tech all the time. And so if you're not buying tech, then you're not doing something right. I mean, the Dow was, for most of this year, was like flat, even though the S&P was up 12%. Now it's spiked up recently. But the point being is the market's all over the place. The market is not healthy. It's not normal. And that effectively at some point leads to a recession or bad times. And so what do you want to own if we have high inflation? Like, we're in a cycle where commodities should do well. Not all commodities, but in general, they should do well. But we'll see. If inflation declines, then I probably wouldn't be an owner of commodities, and deflation is declining. So precious metals are different, but commodities in general, I would probably wait until we have an inflationary period again, which who knows? We'll see when the election's over what happens. So I do like Paul's thinking. I have my own thoughts on it and some other things, but I think his head's in the right place.
Okay, for the last segment, I am going to disagree with Kirk, not by his kind of overall picture. Chances are we're going to keep printing money. Agree with that. Assets, commodities, what you have to realize is you get no dividends when you own them. Same with gold, same with silver. The only thing you get is the hope of appreciation. So just be aware of that if you're wrong and you buy commodities or you buy gold and they don't appreciate, you've got nothing. You're sitting there with, a depreciated asset. Now, I'm a fan of index fund investing. You buy the whole market, and some stocks are going to go up and some are going to go down. But if you think that over the long period, American and global businesses will continue to expand and do well, which I do. I have confidence in the world markets that we will continue to grow. Yes, I believe the stock market is overvalued now, but I do believe you need a position in the stock market. I also like bonds because they're less volatile than the stock market. And yeah, 2022 was not a great year for bonds. Bonds and stocks fell. That happens very, very rarely. So for my take, I like a diversified portfolio. So I am Barbara Friedberg. You can find me at Barbara Friedberg Personal Finance online and on YouTube. And now I will turn it over to Phil to wrap up.
Thanks, Barb. So you and I think more alike on this issue, on this issue about like what to own. Like one thing I talk about, you said, well, the market seems overvalued to get out. Well, I don't believe in timing the market. And I usually take the view, I have a positive long-term view too, that when we invest, we're making an implicit assumption that the market is going up long-term. So as long as that's our assumption, unless I need the money now, I don't want to try, if I pull it out, now I got to figure out when to put the money back in. And it makes more and more decisions I have to make. And I'd rather have to make fewer decisions. I'll rebalance, but I'd rather keep the money there because I believe that long-term we're going to go higher. And so I don't want to miss those gains. I like dividend stocks because I know I get something. Like a lot of times I think about the concept of getting paid to wait. If I buy a stock today, maybe it doesn't go up, maybe it goes down a little bit above getting a dividend and it goes up over the long term. Well, I'm getting income from it over time. And that can really help, especially if have switched from that asset accumulation to asset decumulation. You're in retirement, you're pulling money out. Those dividends can help because then you don't have to sell things to raise the money that you need. So I don't really make commodities a regular part. I do diversify. That's usually, commodities usually are not a regular part of what I do. Occasionally, if a client requests it, I'll consider it and we'll talk about it. But they don't pay income. It's hard for me to value them. I mean, it gets back to when we were talking about the different cryptocurrencies. It's hard for me to know what the value is. So I feel like there's more speculation there. I may not always be right, but I know I have a means that I can use to try to value stocks in the stock market that's a little bit easier. As for me, I know that experiencing big life transitions can be successful. My job is to help empower women facing new beginnings with the financial knowledge and tools they need to make self-assured decisions. My firm's Apprise Wealth Management. We'd love to get to know you. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can download our free ebook, How to Flourish Through Life's Big Changes, at apprisewealth.com/ebook. And you can also sign up for our blog. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Phil, and thanks for hosting, Barb. This is fun. I get to get in the hot seat once in a while, and I always love it when you disagree with me. So thank you for that.
That's the show for this week. Thank you again for joining us on Money Tree Investing Podcast. My name's Kirk Chisholm, Wealth Manager of Innovative Advisor Group. We don't just manage your wealth, we make your life better. You can find more about me at innovativewealth.com, and of course, you can find me every week here on this show. You can also check out our show at Money Tree Investing Podcast. On our website, you'll have access to the show notes, resources, and the archive shows. Please remember to subscribe on our YouTube channel for immediate access to the new shows when they're released. When you subscribe to the show, it allows us to get access to some of the top minds of investing in personal finance. While you're here, please leave a comment and question if you want us to address it on the show. Have a great week ahead, and remember, no one will care about your money like you do, so invest in your life.